helter skelter. Two words that defined one of the darkest and most infamous chapters in American criminal history. Two words that sold millions of books, shaped a sensational trial, and convinced the world it understood exactly what the Manson family was and why they killed. For nearly 6 decades, that has been the accepted narrative. And for a long time, I believed it too. Then I started asking different questions. I spent 3 years researching and writing my book, The Manson Family, More to the Story, because I believed the real truth was buried underneath that narrative. I discovered that before the verdicts, before the trials, before the arrests in Death Valley, and long before the killings in the summer swelter of 1969, they were just young people in a turbulent era. Seekers, drifters, believers, drawn toward something that felt, in those early days, like the most beautiful thing they'd ever experienced. This podcast is that story. At times, the hemmed-in crowdedness of San Francisco made Charlie irritable. That May, he began to take solo hitchhiking trips down the coast and around the state. Sometimes he was gone a day or two, sometimes a week. His travels took him to Sacramento, to Mendocino, to the desert, but he returned to Mary after each voyage. On one hitchhiking trip, he was picked up by a middle-aged, balding man named Dean Morehouse. Morehouse, an ex-pastor, wanted to save wayward old Charlie from his sins. He invited Manson to his home that evening to break bread together. At the Morehouse home in San Jose, Charlie ate dinner, read the Bible, and sang spirituals with Dean, and he found 2 objects to admire. A piano Dean said he could have, and Dean's 14-year-old daughter. Ruth Ann Morehouse, a pretty brunette, was the youngest child of Dean and his wife Audrey. She was born in Toronto, Canada. Dean later proved himself a creepy old man, and some have suspected that Ruth might have been molested by her father. She was certainly highly sexualized for someone so young. Charlie returned to the Morehouse home a week later, negotiating with a neighbor for a 1961 Volkswagen microbus in exchange for Dean's piano. Even Manson knew that having wheels was more likely to bring him the freedom he desired than a rusty old piano. Charlie and Mary quickly turned the VW bus into a mobile love pad. Tapestries covered the windows, and paisley pillows adorned the interior. Mary took a vacation from the library that summer, and she and Charlie began to meander around the West Coast. When they headed north to Seattle, Manson tried to locate his mother, but he could not find Kathleen. Meanwhile, the couple visited old prison friends and enjoyed life on the road. But Charlie had to check in with his parole officer, so they soon headed back to San Francisco. As part of his parole, he had to demonstrate that he could earn a living. So along with some cash earned busking, he secured a couple of one-night gigs at local clubs. Charlie spent most of the money on marijuana and gas for the bus. He still had that number from Phil Kaufman for the record executive. After 2-3 months of freedom, Charlie finally felt brave enough to pitch himself to the producer. He asked Roger Smith for permission to spend time in Los Angeles, and the request was granted. Mary was working, so she sent Charlie solo in the bus. When he arrived in L.A., Kaufman's studio friend was unavailable. So Manson hung out on the Sunset Strip and reminisced about his time there in 1959. He tried to contact his old buddies, but found them scattered. He asked around for gigs and was turned down. After all, he had no musical resume or demo tapes or a manager. This was the first time that he allowed himself to really dream of success and found it elusive. Charlie Manson's primary motive was to get famous, explained Mark EBNER, New York Times bestselling author, from the documentary Charles Manson, Fame and Scandal, 2016, Time Warner Cable. So he drove to Venice Beach to see the waves, maybe buy a joint. There he came upon a girl, crying and sitting alone on a park bench. A slender, red-haired, freckled waif, sobbing and clutching a dictionary. Charlie sensed a damsel in distress, and he stepped in to the rescue. Her name was Lynette Fromme, and she'd just been kicked out of her home by her father. Manson soothed her, comforted her with words, and then told her she'd be okay. As he headed back to the bus, however, Lynette was merely a hop, skip, and a jump behind, asking a gazillion questions. 18-year-old Lynette grew up in Santa Monica. Her father was an engineer in the aerospace industry. She was a lively child who performed with a local dance group, the Lariats, even appearing on the Lawrence Welk Show. She was also a gifted writer, winning awards in high school for her poetry. But when the family moved to Redondo Beach, Lynette began taking drugs and drinking and was frequently at odds with her strict father. She barely graduated from high school and fought her dad on continuing her education, eventually enrolling at nearby El Camino Junior College. Lynn, as friends and family called her, had a special affinity for animals. Sprite-like and effervescent, she seemed to commune with the neighborhood dogs, cats, raccoons, and chirping birds. Her exuberance and natural talent had been a particularly important tool in surviving her childhood. Her father had morphed from a serious young military man into a harsh and bitter rageaholic who took his frustrations out on his wife and kids. Light-hearted Lynn seemed to especially bear the brunt of his anger. It is not uncommon for the children of angry, violent parents to try to diffuse a tense household through dance, song, and humor. It's a common coping mechanism, and by the time Lynn was 18, she'd done all she could to survive her father's wrath. She was popular in school. One boyfriend, Bill Sidens, later managed the Doors, and she was good friends with the late Phil Hartman of Saturday Night Live, but known as flighty and nervous among her peers. When manipulating women into a life of prostitution, pimps master the art of getting into a girl's head, discovering her specific tics, her foibles, her fears, and then using them to break the girl down. The goal is to make them less susceptible to the influences that came before the pimp arrived in their life. Daddy issues were particularly prevalent in the 1960s. Charlie could easily assume that a girl may be manipulated by telling her that she didn't deserve the father she had. In Lynette's case, however, he was right. Not only was Lynette's father a volatile control freak, but her mother had become a doormat in response, a shell of a person trying to survive her husband's outbursts. As the second woman to join Manson's family, Lynn learned to utilize both her father's rage and her mother's ability to check out in the transformative years to come. Lynette Alice Fromme, in fact, had the instincts to be as mercurial as the man she had just met. Lynn joined Charlie on his ride back to San Francisco. There she shadowed him as he looked for performing gigs or resorted to panhandling. Everywhere they went, Charlie knew people. Teenage girls would rush up to him, announcing they were pregnant. He smiled beatifically, patted them on the head, and gave them an encouraging word or two. They were runaways and hookers. Lynn grew up in a traditional home, and though she dabbled with alcohol and LSD, initially found these interactions very strange. But within a short time she accepted that the gardener, as Charlie called himself, tended to others with affection and care and without judgment. At the apartment that night, Lynn found Mary rather uptight, with her precise household rules and codependent relationship with her dog. Then Charlie laughed and offered to help Mary and Lynn get over their conditioning. He especially enjoyed taking a shit in front of them to get them over their bathroom etiquette hang-ups. And Lynn's love for animals melded symbiotically with Mary's passion for the planet. Soon the two were like two peas in a pod. One day, while Mary was at work, Charlie told Lynette to take off her clothes. She became shy and turned away, and told him she didn't know why, but she couldn't.
I know better than that,
He chuckled.
There isn't anything you don't know, Lynn. Now take off your clothes. I want to look at you.
Charlie had the bravado and forcefulness of her father, but used gentle words and a calming smile. That moment, Lynette laid her head on his shoulder in gratitude. She wanted him to hold her, to protect her. She was willing to have sex if it meant she might be loved. Before sex, Charlie got Lynn to admit that she wanted her father to hit her because she craved his attention and would accept anything from him, good or bad. Charlie could always find a connection, embedded in his own limited experience, to relate to others. He had craved his mother's attention, his uncle's, his prison mentors. He mirrored the experience of whoever was in front of him to get them to acquiesce to him. Lynette did, but there was a hesitation those first weeks they spent together. She wasn't completely ready to let go of her past. That summer, Charlie was visited by two jail buddies. One was a counterfeiter. Perhaps if Charlie hadn't had such wanderlust at the moment, he might have joined Danny's criminal activity. In fact, Charlie actually found work that summer. Mostly it was just standing on street corners with an open palm, but he was also handy enough to help neighbors with light home improvement projects. Mary had grown weary of her library job and decided to quit. Unbeknownst at the time, she was also pregnant. They were living at 636 Cole Street in San Francisco, 2 blocks from the offices of the Process, aka the Process Church of the Final Judgment. The Process was established 3 years before in London by former Scientologists, but allegedly embraced some precepts from Satanism. Also for a time, an ex-Catholic nun named Mary Ann lived at Cole Street with Charlie, Mary, and Lynn. Later, Mary Ann moved to Sacramento, but stayed in contact with the women. At the end of summer, Mary's parents came to town. The visit didn't go well, recalled Lynn in her 2018 memoir, Reflection, from PEASENHALL Press.
Mary came through the screen door, smiling with a red face and wounded eyes. Her mother had chastised her for giving up a good job, and her dad had called Charlie a mooch.
After the Bruners departed, the trio hit the road.
We were rolling north out of suburban traffic, past the surfers in Bodega Bay, to an unoccupied beach where we could take off our clothes. As Mary ran to the water, Charlie told me to look at how beautiful she was.
They journeyed up and down the coast together, to Mendocino and then south. Lynette often felt like a third wheel that season. She was not in love with Manson, not yet. In fact, she had been dating a surfer dude before she got into the bus with Charlie that summer day. But she was fascinated by both Manson and Mary. Mary Brunner is a bit of an enigma. She has never divulged her own memories of that time or her understanding of the elements she helped to create. But Mary was a critical member of the family. especially to the other women. She was older than most of them and welcomed them into her life, her home, her bed, and her heart. It is clear that she was intelligent, that she had values, dreams, and ambitions, but like so many others, those values became twisted with each passing month beside Manson. Charlie brought Mary and Lynette to San Jose to visit the Morehouse residence. They planned to stay for a night or two, but 2 weeks later they were still there. Charlie and Dean rapped all night about Jesus, while Dean's frustrated wife grew impatient with their house guests. Audrey Morehouse finally left to visit her sister, leaving the threesome with Dean and youngest Ruth Ann. One day, Charlie and Ruth Ann took off together in the VW bus. Her mother called the house several times, demanding to know where her daughter was. When she spoke to Lynette, Audrey was told not to worry. Meanwhile, in Mendocino County, Charlie had sex with the 14-year-old a few times before being found by police who'd been contacted by Ruth Ann's mother. Manson was arrested. Ruth Ann was sent home, but not before Charlie gave her a piece of advice. Marry some poor schmuck, and you'll be emancipated. Then you can leave him and do whatever you want to do. Audrey and Dean got divorced soon after that. Manson, Mary, and Lynn drove south, staying in Santa Barbara for a spell. During that trip, the dog Muffet wandered away and was not seen again. Thank you for listening to the Manson Family, More to the Story. In this podcast, we focus on peeling back the layers, one chapter at a time, in order to demystify the family and destroy the myths that leave us in the stone-cold dark. In our next episode, The Black Bus, the group that will become the Manson family takes its first real shape. 3 young women, a black school bus, and a man who had spent 20 years being told he was worthless and finally found people willing to tell him otherwise. The most dangerous cults don't begin in darkness. They begin in love. This is H. Allegra Lansing. The story of the family and the murders of 1969 have always been more than a crime story. This is a human story, and there is an imperative to understand it, because the vulnerabilities that drew those young people into darkness are not unique to them. They belong to all of us. This podcast series is drawn from my book, The Manson Family, More to the Story, published by Story Stratosphere, and is based on historical records, contemporary reporting, and archival research. Citations for this episode can be found in the show notes. All writing and most narration by yours truly. Theme music is Masked by Silent Partner, with additional scoring through Echoes of Time by Kevin MacLeod.